slavery, but few discuss paper genocide. We did not all come from Africa, and most of us have Aboriginal roots that were stripped away due to reclassification and miseducation. As a Native Black American and a member of the Muskogee Creek Nation, I understand the importance of tracing your lineage. If you want to learn how to trace your genealogy and apply for tribal citizenship, send an email to mike@keymediapro.com to schedule a consultation.
I am not a slave, I was born to slide, I am not afraid. Hop about the K, oh yeah, free to God, they went out of state. I'm a child of God, I do not belong to the United States. Fuck Black History, tell Uncle Sam he can catch a fade. I went to hell, I mean school, graduated at the top of my class. Still never thought I was over my peers. We did that time together, 12 years. Ain't that some movie? I think that it is. They won't control me, I'm really a member. I traveled that road, I came back with the jewels from. When I pull up, they peep how the roof gone. We some dog killers, won't chew bones. Know we all spit on, we supreme. Somewhere I read a nigga had a dream.
You don't have to try to be something you're not. Oh, God, I can't stand this.
Trying to be something I'm not? Trying to be proud of my African heritage? That's being something I'm not, then fine.
My grandmother was a full-blooded Iroquois. My grandfather was a black from a long line of journeymen who lived in Connecticut since the establishment of the colonies. My father was a Bajan who came to this country a cabin boy in a merchant marina.
I know all of that, Mama.
Then know this. I am alive because of the blood of a people who never scraped or begged or apologized for what they were. They asked only one thing of this world: to be allowed to be. I gave you my grandmother's name, a woman who bore 9 children and educated them all. Who held off 6 white men with a shotgun when they tried to drag one of her sons off to jail for not knowing his place. And you had to reach into an African dictionary to find a name that would make you proud.
I was born black, I live black, and I'm gonna die probably because some cracker that knows I'm black better than you, nigga, is probably gonna put a bullet in the back of my head.
This is the remix. My father was raised in the era when black niggas couldn't claim Native American. Making music would've thought I had help, but the Indians I know wanna be the chief they self.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, let me get some fists and feathers in the chat if you can hear me loud, crisp, and clear. I was experiencing some audio issues on my last broadcast, so hopefully that's got cleared up. Give me some feedback. Let me know. But either way, smash the like button on the way in. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. You won't regret it. Hit the Cash App or the PayPal if you support independent media. And let's get on with the content. Today, we're going to be taking a look at Native Black Americans here before Columbus. We're going to be hearing from a historian. What is his name again? Dr. Anthony Dixon. Today we're going to hear from a Dr. Anthony Dixon. So let's go ahead and see what the good doctor is going to teach us today. Before we dive into the content, I do urge you guys to check out my new website, nativeblackancestry.com, to access further historical data on Native Black Americans, as well as direct access to my genealogy services. But let's get on with the show.
All right, this time I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about a Florida topic, but it's important in understanding the relationship between Blacks and Native Americans. And so I'm going to take a few minutes to discuss the Seminole Nation and the Seminole Native Americans and their relationship to the Florida Maroons. When we talk about first Florida Maroons, we're talking about individuals who escaped servitude and escaped enslavement from the English colonies, particularly the Carolinas, and created the first Underground Railroad. And that Underground Railroad went southward into what was then called La Florida. which of course,
Hold on, let's get into it. We've all heard of the Underground Railroad, but I didn't realize that the first Underground Railroad was built by Black Indians in the South. I have heard of the Seminoles, Seminole, Runaway. I have heard about the Seminole Wars, where they went into armed combat against Andrew Jackson and the United States government, protesting slavery as well as Indian removal to Oklahoma. But I didn't realize that they had started the first Underground Railroad.
was Spanish territory. Now, the makeup of these Maroons, we're now getting more and more information, and we're understanding that they were Gullah people, and these are West Africans and a mixture of West Africans who created their own culture, and they created their own language called Geechee. And so it was a mixture again of West Africans, and then the language was a mixture of West African languages, which included plantation English dialect, and that was the basis of Geechee. Now, there are also indigenous melanated people or indigenous blacks.
So here he's differentiating the two groups. Again, the transatlantic slave trade is not a conspiracy. Africans really did capture their fellow African and sell them into slavery to Europeans, who then trafficked them around the world. That really did happen. But less than 4% of those African slaves actually came to what we now know as America or the United States. 4%, less than 4%. So there were some West African slaves who did come to the colonies, who did find their way in the South, but they were the extreme minority. And us Black Indians who were here and indigenous here since time immemorial, we took in these West Africans. We let them flee the plantation and run to our tribal land. We adopted them into our tribe and allowed them to join in on the fight. So again, we acknowledge that some Black Americans, very few of us, do have a very distant African lineage, but the vast majority of Black Americans have Aboriginal roots with no African heritage at all.
These are blacks who were in America before Europeans came to America. Now, what we understand is these people were all, and these two groups of blacks were all enslaved in English plantation society. And again, they escaped and they came down into La Florida. Now, when they came into La Florida, they began to create their own communities and they began to eke out their own existence. And in doing so, we now call them the Florida Maroons. Now, what also happens is because plantation society begins to encroach upon or begin to take over Native American Indian lands, they are now coming southward into La Florida as well. And so in the late 1600s, the Spanish saw this as an opportunity to weaken plantation society for the English. And so they put out an edict in 1693 and said any enslaved individual that escapes and comes down in La Florida can live free. And so that kind of further established the first Underground Railroad. And so the Native Americans were a homogenous group of Native Americans that we consider today and we look at and consider today, but also they included these indigenous blacks. And so when they come down into La Florida, in a short period in the early 1700s, a problem occurs between a larger Native American group to which the English call the Creeks. And they split over the issue of slavery.
Yep. And that is my tribe, the Muskogee Creek Nation. There was the Upper Creeks and the Lower Creeks. Some Creeks wanted to get down with the white folks and run plantations and have slaves. And some Creeks was like, nah, we ain't vibing with that. Some Creeks abandoned the Creek Nation and fled to Florida, joined in on the fight against the U.S. government, and they amalgamated into the Seminole tribe. So there's a rich, rich history there.
And so the Northern Creeks pushed their way down into La Florida. And when they mixed with these smaller bands and these smaller tribes, they became this homogenous group called the Seminoles. And so the Seminoles, who were living as indigenous people, whether they were Black or Native American, had their villages. And then you had the blacks, who are the Florida Maroons, who were coming directly from English plantation society. And so what happens is we start seeing a mixture of culture, and they begin in time to intermingle. Now, what we find is the Geechee language develops into a different language. which incorporates Native American words. And so when this happens, we see that the cultural mixture begins to get even deeper. And so as they are trying to fight off the encroachment of the English, as the English began to continue to get land, and they push and get the Spanish to cede over Florida in the early 1800s, all types of dynamics change. Now, within the dynamics, though, it's important to understand that you had rules. Native American culture resided and relied upon the matrilineal line. So if your mother was a Native American, or she was within Native American culture, then the child was considered in Native American culture because they belonged to a clan. And the only way you could belong to a clan is through the matrilineal line. Now, for those who had a father that was Native American, but a mother who was Black, whether she was Gullah or simply considered a Florida Maroon, they resided in the Florida Maroon villages. And so in time, we see the Florida Maroons and the Seminole culture, the Native American culture, coming together because they needed each other in order to survive.
And this is what most people don't realize. We hear about tribes like the Creek and the Choctaw and the this and the that, and we come up with a certain idea of what we think of as a tribe. Well, when you look at my quote unquote tribe, the Muskogee Creek Nation, we were never a classical tribe like you would think. The Creek Nation is an amalgamation of 50 different clans. 50 different clans come together and become this tribe that we now call the Creek Nation. When you look at something like the Seminoles, you think of the Seminoles as a completely separate tribe. No, some Creek Indians joined the Seminoles. Some Gullah Geechee West African slaves joined the Seminoles. You find that it wasn't this always such a pure tribe or nation. It's really just a band of misfits, if you will, a gang of people. We may adopt you, we may adopt you, you rocking with us, you rolling with us now, but these are different clans, which also is the reason why, if you notice, Black Americans, especially us nerds out there, what do we really rock with? We rock with Japanese culture, Japanese anime, that samurai shit, that ninja shit. What is it about that that's in our DNA instinctually that we gravitate towards? The feudal society, the different confederacies and clans and feuds, that's how we lived. It was this clan versus that clan, and these 10 clans might form a confederacy and a large group, and this was always clan against clan.
Aspects, and we can get into that on a different segment. But the key to understanding the difference between the Florida Maroons and the Seminoles that belonged in Seminole society was through that matrilineal line. Now, after the first Seminole War, and there were 3 wars now, but after the first Seminole War, they go into a deeper relationship, and they actually solidified their relationship and put more patterns and more, not really patterns, but more rules and how they would be engaged and how they would survive together. And so at that point, after the first Seminole War, we stopped calling them Florida Maroons, and we simply collectively called them Black Seminoles. But within the Seminole Nation, there was clear distinction. And that clear distinction was based, again, on your matrilineal line and whether or not you belong to a clan. And so names changed, and the English put their names on certain things, and all of this, certain people rather, and all of these different things changed. And you go through freedman and terms like Seminole freedman and Black Seminole. But collectively, once they go out west, they are all called Black Seminoles. And actually, at the end of the first Seminole War, when they go into this formal agreement, we really stop calling them Florida Maroons and call them collectively Black Seminoles. And so we have to understand that regardless of the different name and name changes and what the government and plantation society call these people as opposed to what they call themselves, when we look at just the people, then we can understand better this relationship.
And another thing that I actually shed light on during my one-on-one genealogy consultations is the reclassification and the way that they subvert our history. When you guys hear about terms like freedman, you think of freedman as like an African slave of a Native American or something. No, freedman is basically a brown paper bag test where if you were Indian and you were too dark, they labeled you on the doll's roll as a freedman. There's these rumors that we hear about black Indians, or excuse me, black folks being enslaved by Indians. And, people say, oh, if you say you're black and you're Indian, your ancestors were really just enslaved by the tribe. This is propaganda put out by our colonizer. Matter of fact, let me share a quick clip from a video that I share with all of my genealogy clients. This is a piece of information I share with every single person I sit down one-on-one with for a consultation. I share this with them to show them that things are much more nuanced than they write in a history book. We may have ancestors classified as freedmen, classified as slaves, classified as indentured servants, but that's not necessarily the lifestyle they were living at all. Let's go ahead and take a look at the slaves, the black slaves that the Seminole tribe allegedly had.
A close relationship developed between Seminoles and blacks on this prairie. Some white observers mistakenly assumed the blacks were slaves to the Seminoles.
Did you catch that? Some white observers mistakenly assumed that the blacks were slaves of the Seminoles. Hold on. I see the beautiful sister right there. It's a Ty Dash, right? Ty Dash. It's like we see Ty Dash in a group of people, and Ty Dash is the darker skinned person. The other people are a bit more light skinned than her. So we're gonna say, hey Ty, you're the other people's slave. Yeah. She's the darkest one in the group, so she's the other people's slave. Why? Is it because they're beating her or subjugating her or making her do harsh labor? No, because she's the darker one in the group. Yeah, that makes sense. That tracks. So to this day, they put out these stories of the 5 civilized tribes having slaves. And some tribes did have black folks in their stewardship classified as slaves. But when you look into the history, they was not treating them like slaves. It was a far cry from what we think of as slavery. And with certain tribes like the Seminole Nation, they never had slaves. They went to war against the U.S. government, protesting slavery and Indian removal. But listen to how the white observer is going to mistakenly assume some shit. How you assume somebody's a slave based on their skin color.
A close relationship developed between Seminoles and blacks on this prairie. Some white observers mistakenly assumed the blacks were slaves to the Seminoles.
It really was not a slave-master relationship. It was more a free existence. They intermarried. The children were accepted in the tribes quite easily, and they had a common interest in wanting to hold that land where they were living freely. They had acquired big herds of cattle themselves. They had nice fields and homes.
So do you see why it's important for us to tell our own story? For us to not rely on his story, his version of events? I mean, let's talk about it, y'all. Let's talk about it. Truth is much more stranger than fiction.
But it is a powerful relationship that we can use to understand the overall quote unquote Native American and black relationship. I want to take just a few minutes to talk about someone who should be far more in the annals of history and studied and actually popularized more than he is. And his name is Osceola. Now, when you think of the wars fought with the U.S. military and Native Americans, you think of Geronimo, Sitting Bull, Chief Joseph. Those names are the more popular and familiar names. But Osceola isn't. Even though the war with the Seminole Nation, the Second Seminole War rather, lasted 7 years, which was the longest, deadliest, and costliest war the government fought. Now, I'll admit, I didn't do much research on Osceola until recently being the last year and a half or so. But I understood quickly, and previously before that, why he wasn't placed in the annals of history the way Geronimo and the others were. And it's because of his heritage. You see, Osceola was actually mixed. His father was white, and his mother was mixed, black and Native American. And in the war, his closest allies and most of the men in his band when he would do the guerrilla warfare were black Seminoles. And he, of course, also had a black wife. Now, she wasn't his only wife, but he did have a black wife. And so the thing about it is that his mother, as I just mentioned, she was mixed, black and Native American. But in Native American culture, it's matrilineal, which means if your mother is your bloodline to Native Americans, that means you basically grow up in Native American culture. So he didn't grow up in the Florida Maroon culture or in the black Seminole villages, but he did grow up in Native American villages, and he grew up in Native American culture. Now, again, because of this heritage, we find that he is not given the credit in the overall annals of history, even though in Florida, he's very popular. There's Osceola County. If you go to Tallahassee, his name is everywhere. And of course, Florida State, he's prominent at Florida State. Their mascot is called Chief Osceola. There's an Osceola Hall and all of those things.
Hold up. I didn't know this. Fun fact. Wait, so the Florida State mascot is a Chief Osceola? Hold up. Let me look that up. I had no idea. They be hiding this shit in plain sight, y'all. They said they got a county named after him. I'm telling you, y'all, look up the name of the state you live in. I bet you it stems from an Indian word. Look up the counties around you. I bet you they're named after indigenous tribes. I mean, they be hiding this shit right in plain sight. I was today's years old. I found out right now in real time with some of you. We just found out together that the Florida State mascot is this mixed race black Indian man who fought during the Seminole Wars. Osceola and Renegade. Damn. How many people go to Florida State and really don't even realize the history and the heritage behind their mess? Wait, they're called the Florida State Seminoles? I didn't even know that, y'all. I'm from California. Okay, I don't really follow sports. I didn't know Florida State football team was called the Florida State Seminoles. That's wild. That's wild. Shout out to Dave B. Dave B says there's an Osceola Street near FAMU. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, y'all, this is interesting. They had this shit in plain sight. Okay. Let me get some feathers in the chat if you just learned for the first time about the Florida State mascot and that they're named the Seminoles and all that good stuff. And let's get back into the content.
That are named after him. But he is not given anywhere near the credit. And this, again, is something that we need to work on. And we need to recognize this man's contributions in American history. The fact that he also had a white name, which was Powell, indicated that he was recognized by whites during his time period, which was basically the early to mid 1800s. But the thing about it is, Osceola was not a man that they would want to place highly in the annals of history because of what he stood for. And he stood not just against the removal of Native Americans from their land to reservations, but he also represented the fight for freedom that his black counterparts were partaking upon. And he took that fight and made it part of his own fight as well. And so we need to re-examine and do much more work on Osceola, and we need to understand what Osceola went through in terms of him understanding his place as it relates rather to Native American society, Black society, as well as white society. So remember that name, Osceola. Do a little research on him. He is someone that should be well known and recognized, just like Geronimo. I was recently asked about the separation or division between Seminole Native Americans and Black Seminoles. And so I want to give a quick historical overview of why that relationship and how that relationship.
And as you can see, history is so nuanced. We've got Black Indians who are part American Indian, part West African runaway slave. And then we've got Black Indians who are just Aborigines from America from day one, and they have no African admixture. You know, guys, somebody put it in a very good terms to me recently. let me see if I can remember how they phrased this. They provided some just juxtaposition between two animals, and I want to say it was I want to say it was the panther and the leopard. I want to say that's what it was. The difference between the panther and the leopard. Let me see. Let me see. See if I can bring something up here. Hold on, guys. We're freestyling, and maybe it wasn't leopard. Let me think. Which cat? Which wild cat is indigenous? All right, guys. All right, guys. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. So basically, what this person was highlighting was phenotype may be similar. You know, the reason why they were able to, you know, reclassify Black Indians as Africans, I don't want to say easily, but they were able to do it. It's because of the somewhat similar phenotype. I mean, we've got depictions going back to the 1600s, and all of them show, oh, wait a minute. We're dealing with some technical difficulties now. Let me see if I can bring up the slide. All of these depictions clearly show the Aborigines as being melanated folks. And I'll have to bring this up another way. You know what? We're going to cue to a quick commercial break since I hate not having my shit together. Okay, let me go ahead and get these documents ready so I can run some receipts for you. I'll be right back.
Life and giving me the direction I always needed, because growing up, I did not know about my family, nor did I know how to find out about my family. So the fact that like I tried other avenues and I felt like I was getting scammed, going through his consultation, I really felt like someone was actually trying to help me out and throwing a lot of fat on my head, bro. Like a lot of the things that he dropped, a lot of the gems that he's gonna show you, wholeheartedly, man, hang on tight, because that shit blew my mind.
All right, and we're back. So as I was saying before, the earliest accounts of the American Indians are melanated folks. Vizcaino, Torquemada, De Soto, Cristobal Colon, you name it, they all depict melanated Aboriginals. Well, let's shed light on something. In 1682, Virginia passed acts that combined Native Americans and Africans into one category, Negro. So they're going to take Native Americans, they're going to take Africans, they're going to lump them together, and you guys both are now colloquially known as Negro. Well, wait a minute, something doesn't quite add up, right? I mean, if we're supposed to believe that the original Native Americans look like Elizabeth Warren, I mean, if we're really supposed to believe that the original American Indians look like Pocahontas, then how do you reclassify that as an African, as a Negro? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. The math is not mathing on that one. We're supposed to believe Native Americans are these straight hair, mongoloid, slanted eye, Asian looking folks, but you're reclassifying them into the same group as African. Well, hold on. Let's actually bring up some depictions here. Let me bring up some documents. You know, I'm dealing with technical difficulties. Whenever I'm really getting into the real history, we always deal with some technical difficulties. It is what it is, what it's going to be. But check this out, guys. Check this out. 1682, Virginia is going to reclassify us as Negro. But wait a minute. We're supposed to believe this is what the original American Indians look like. How do you take somebody that looks like this and reclassify them as an African, reclassify them as a Negro? I mean, homegirl looks like a mix between Elizabeth Warren and Genghis Khan. So how do you take her and reclassify her as a Negro? Wait, you can't. But if the original American Indians look like this, oh, wait a minute, they got some melanin. Okay, they nose a little round. All right, I can see how you can reclassify somebody that looks like this as a Negro, as an African. Clearly, we can still see the differences between us and Africans, but to a white person, come on, to a white person, yeah, you guys are Negroes, especially if they have a secret agenda to miseducate us, reclassify us, and make us victims of paper genocide so they can steal our land, right? So again, I say all that to say phenotype is very important. And as far as the original analogy I was searching for earlier, I can't remember it exactly, but basically, and maybe the chat can help me because you guys are so smart. There's two different types of wildcat. One that's indigenous to the Americas, one's that's indigenous to Africa. And I know for a fact that a leopard is one of them. And although a leopard looks very, very similar to this other cat, they're clearly a distinctly different species. They've got a different, ethnogenesis they've undergone. They're from different continents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, just because you have melanin, just because you have some similar phenotype, that does not mean that you're an African. And the reason why they have a concerted effort to convince all of us that we descend from Africans is because, hey, how do we fight for our land if we don't even think this is our land? If they can trick us and make us think we're Africans, maybe one day they can trick us into going back to Africa. Wink, wink. See how that works?
Deteriorated. It began during the Second Seminole War. And during the war, the Black Seminoles and those recent runaways who joined the fight were given an opportunity to ensure their freedom if they simply relocated out west to the Arkansas Territory. And so many of the Black Seminoles quit fighting. And so many of the Seminole Native American counterparts were upset with the Black Seminoles because they stopped fighting. But they made it clear to them that freedom was their primary objective, and that they would work with, hand in hand, Native Americans to try to ensure that they keep their land. But make no mistake about it, freedom was their top priority. And so there's the discussion also about Osceola himself, the primary war chief during the Second Seminole War, having some negative things to say about Black Seminoles, although Osceola was mixed himself.
Let's get into it. Oh, and guys, I finally found the analogy that I was looking for. I know it took a moment. Bear with me now. Bear with me. But essentially, you have the leopard and you have the jaguar. Jaguars are indigenous to the Americas. Leopards come from Africa. Leopards and jaguars look damn near identical. That's a jaguar on the left. This is a leopard on the right. They look damn near identical. But if you know how to spot the difference, if you know their history, then you don't even have to question whether or not these are the same species, the same animal. So that is to say, West Africans do look a little bit similar sometimes to Aboriginals of the Americas, but that don't mean we're the same person. We're looking at the difference between a jaguar and a leopard, okay? Jaguar and a leopard. Let's get into it.
His mother was half Black and half Native American. Now, I have yet to see this information, but I'm not disputing other researchers and people who have put forth this information. I can simply deduce that when Osceola was taken and he was captured under a truce and he was removed from Florida, he was simply garnering information that was passed to him by other Native Americans who were going to the fort in which he was being held, but also through U.S. military personnel. And so he very well may have been upset as well because he knew that the Black Seminoles were the best fighters. Even the U.S. military said that the Black Seminoles were the best fighters. So he knew that the Native Americans and their fight for land was directly tied to Black Seminoles and their fight for freedom. And so when they stopped their fight, then he must have known also that this would be quite detrimental to the Seminole Native Americans' fight for land. Because you have to understand, even though Osceola was mixed, he grew up in Native American culture. And so I would only say to that also that we have to check that source in which we have that claims that Osceola made these statements, because if it's the U.S. military or a U.S. Florida Territory paper that printed this statement or put this quote out, or these negative words out per se, then we may have to take that with a grain of salt. That may have been a tactic to further divide the Native Americans and the blacks. Now, that was again the first major division, or major thing that happened rather that caused that division. Once they moved out west, the dynamics of the relationship changed, and they were in the Arkansas Territory, and then they moved further west into the Arkansas Territory, which is now present day Oklahoma. Now, the thing about it is, when they were in Florida, they had a relationship where there were three fields. There was a field or crops that were done by Native Americans. There was a field or crops that were done by the Black Seminoles and Florida Maroons. And then there was a third field in which they worked together, but the proceeds went to the Native Americans. And this was for protection, as well as them being able to trade for things that they needed for both communities. Now, when they got out west, however, there were certain Native Americans who expected blacks to continue with the same relationship in creating this third tribute field. And so the Black Seminoles questioned that, and they said, why would we continue to do a tribute field? We're all free, we all have this land, and there's no...
And again, I was dealing with some technical difficulties earlier, and I'm a bit of a perfectionist. So let me go ahead and spin the block on what I was trying to say earlier in a lot more polished way. When it comes to the ancestry of Black Americans, it's in my humble opinion, my research has shown to me that over 99% of us descend from copper-colored Aboriginals with no African admixture at all. But there is a small percentage of us that do have some mixed lineage. What do I mean by mixed lineage? Well, when you look at the Seminoles, for example, there's two types of Black Indians that are a part of the Seminoles. You have your Black Indians that are descendants of African slaves that married an Indian girl and had a baby, or you got your Black Indians who are just copper-colored Aborigines, indigenous folks who've been reclassified since 1682 into different categories such as Negro. Matter of fact, guys, I urge you all to check out my new website, nativeblackancestry.com. But and this isn't even so much of a shameless plug as it is just sharing knowledge, because right on the front page, goddammit, right on the front page of my website, I give you guys the timeline of our reclassification throughout the years. Let me go ahead and pull that up for just a moment. Check this out. So again, there's Black Indians who have a little bit of distant African admixture because, you know, the Black Indian side of the family, you know, took in some African runaways or married them or adopted them into the tribe. So, you know, part West African runaway slave, part American Indian. And then you have American Indians who are descendants from the true indigenous that have been reclassified since 1492. Again, 1492, the Spaniards start calling us Indians. We become Negro in 1682. We become colored in 1851. We become Black in 1960. We become African American in 1988. We're the only group in America that they reclassify consistently like this throughout the centuries. Let's talk about it, y'all. Let's talk about it. And matter of fact, let me go back to my website, because there's another thing I want to highlight. There's another thing. There's some people within this indigenous space that are like anti-African and don't want to acknowledge the small niche minority percentage of us that do have some African heritage. But I'm not an extremist. If you scroll down a little bit, yes, you do have the ability to schedule a consultation, $75. Consultation's about an hour and a half. I show you how to trace your genealogy, get tribal affiliation, et cetera, all in under an hour and a half. But right below that, check this out. I've got this little post I typed up. Black Indians exist. We are indigenous peoples of what is currently known as the Americas and the Caribbean, and some of us are also the descendants of indigenous peoples of Africa. It's important to note that there are Black natives who have no African heritage at all. They are simply the descendants of indigenous people of the Americas. This identity often includes freedmen, the free men and women who were once classified as slaves of the 5 civilized tribes, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Creek, Seminole, and Choctaw, and their descendants. Black natives and freedmen are the legacy of both our Black and Native ancestors. We are the personification of their joy, pain, resistance, and endurance, and it is because of their resilience and hope that we are still alive to this day. So again, I'm not going to, read out the whole post, but this is just to highlight that there are some of us who do. Guys, I'm a full-time genealogist. I've over the last 3 months, I've met with over 150 Black Americans, helping them trace their heritage, tracing it all the way to the 1700s. And out of those 100 plus people I've consulted with, do you know how many I found that had African roots? 3. And how did they have African roots? Well, one side of the family is from Jamaica. They came to Jamaica through the transatlantic slave trade. One side of the family is from St. Barnabas. They came through St. Barnabas. A very extreme niche minority percentage of us that actually have African heritage. Most of us descend from Black Aboriginals. Nothing to do with Africa. But it is very important to highlight the nuance. There is subtle nuance with most things. But let's go ahead and get back to the video.
No need for us to pay tribute, especially when we fought just as hard to get out here as you. And so that was the second major issue that started the rift between the Native Americans and the Blacks within the Seminole Nation. Now, as time goes on again, when land allotments started coming from the U.S. government and the Seminole land started expanding, we had unscrupulous white Americans who would pay $5 just to get on the Indian rolls so that they could be a part of those land allotments. And so there's a term coined for those people, and they're called $5 Indians. And so what we notice is that when the whites who got onto the roll and started getting this land, they also began to enter into the Seminole Nation and into the Seminoles, how they were living, parts of their culture and things of that nature. And they began to also drive a wedge between the Blacks and the Native Americans. They brought more of those negative attitudes against Blacks into the Seminole Nation. And
when you guys hear stories of Native Americans being racist or anti-Black, oftentimes you find it's the $5 Indians. It's the immigrants. It's the white settlers that paid to get a part of the tribe, that paid to get put within a position of power or leadership within the tribe. I mean, come on. Let's talk about it, y'all. Let's talk about it. Truth is stranger than fiction. It wasn't no real Aboriginals discriminated against Black folks. The real Aboriginals were the Black folks. And we took pity on those West Africans that weren't us. But we saw them dealing with hardship. We saw the enemy of our enemy is our friend. So we took him in. But come on, y'all.
Those negative attitudes continued to grow. So that became the third primary issue that happened within the Seminole Nation. Now, there were other small things that happened as well, but these were the three primary issues that caused this major rift between Blacks and Native Americans in the Seminole Nation. And that rift just continued. And as Blacks continued to get more and more of a negative concept, or a negative connotation rather, from whites, Seminole Native Americans began to adapt those negative connotations as well. And it further divided the two. And so that's basically the issue that we see in this rift between Native Americans and Blacks within the Seminole Nation. I want to take a few minutes to touch on a subject that has been gaining more and more popularity, and that is the overwhelming evidence that we are uncovering and we are putting together with past evidence that undeniably proves that Blacks were here in America long before Europeans. Now, we all know the most outward piece of information that was given was Ivan Van Sertima's book, They Came Before Columbus. But also, more and more evidence is becoming clear that...
And hold on. Guys, you got to watch out for Ivan Van Sertima and people like him. Ivan Van Sertima and people like Umar Johnson are part of this strange demographic. These folks acknowledge that there were Black Indians before Columbus, but they try to say, well, these Black Indians really are immigrants from Africa. Yeah, were there Black Indians? Sure, but these Black Indians really came from Africa. They got this weird conspiracy theory, and all these white folks got this weird theory that like there was indigenous people on every square inch of the earth except for America. Apparently, America was just empty and it was just vacant until the Asians came across the Bering Strait or until the Africans came across and became the Olmecs. I mean, they just can't fathom that there's melanated Aboriginals in the Americas, but we're supposed to believe that there's melanated Aboriginals in Australia and Africa and Europe and India and China, but no, this land was vacant. So again, I say watch out for Ivan Van Sertima and that crowd, because they do acknowledge Black indigeneity, but they still try to say, oh, but we came from Africa. Oh, but like the Mali king sent like a ship of a bunch of Africans and then they came to like this virgin land and just like no. Let's just keep it a buck. There's always been people everywhere, even if you believe in the Pangea thing. I mean, there's never been a part of our land except the uninhabitable parts that have never had any people. Like, just makes no sense. So again, these folks will acknowledge Black Indians, but they still try to point us to some African roots for some strange reason.
There were indigenous melanated people in the Americas. And what we're understanding is that that history was erased, and that history has been denied to us because it's not serving an overall purpose. Now, the evidence that we have is in a couple of different things. The first is probably the Spanish. When they arrived in the Caribbean, they described some of the natives as swarthy. And that word swarthy, we knew and know, rather, is synonymous with dark-skinned. Now, another piece of evidence is still with the Spanish. When the Spanish created their first settlement in Gueldape, which is present-day Sapelo Sound, Georgia, the Wale natives, to which we are now looking at and examining whether or not they were the Native Americans that we think of today, or they were indigenous melanated people. What we do know is that when the Wale attacked the settlement of Gueldape, and they attacked from the outside, those who were enslaved inside the settlement began to set fires. So that in itself gives a good indication that there was some relationship between those who were enslaved and those who were part of the Wale. Now, the issue then becomes whether or not these people who were enslaved were all Africans, or were they dark-skinned people who belonged to the Wale.
See, and now he's kind of talking about like the Caribs, the Carib Indians, because again, there's Black indigenous folks in all of the Americas. That's Canada, the United States, Central America, South America, the Caribbean islands. So 99.99% of Black Americans descend from indigenous folks, no African admixture at all. But when you get to the Caribbean, when you get to South America, now it's more like 50-50 or 60-40. Now you've got people who are more so like one half West African and other half indigenous Black Carib or indigenous Black Maroon or what have you. So he's even acknowledging, hey, we think that all these Black folks in the Caribbean are imported African slaves, but how did they have this camaraderie or this connection with the Aboriginals? How were they on code like this, where some of them are lighting fires on the inside and the other ones know to light fires on the outside? What is the relationship there? Maybe they weren't African. Maybe they were indigenous.
Wale. Now, the issue then becomes whether or not these people who were enslaved were all Africans, or were they dark-skinned people who belonged to the Wale. But a synchronized attack occurred, and we know this to be true. So there had to be some relationship, whether it was a relationship between Africans and these indigenous people, or these were indigenous Black people, or even a mixture. But the fact remains that that synchronized attack does indicate. So we are doing more research on that particular event under those ideas of who were those enslaved people at Gueldape and their relationship with the Wale, who attacked. And then there's other evidence that we have in United States Bureau of Indian Affairs papers in which they are describing indigenous people, and they're describing different things that relate to dark skin and the ideas that these dark-skinned people were indeed indigenous. And so when we began to thoroughly put all of those pieces, starting with Van Sertima and the work that was done out west in California, Mexico, Central America, South America, those earlier studies, and then we look at the early Spanish records in the Caribbean and on the East Coast.
And guys, I tell my genealogy clients all the time, if you want to find evidence of Black Aboriginals before Columbus, you know, the earliest documentation, we've got to turn to the account of the Spanish, because the Spanish, who were the first Europeans that came over here, they came to steal the gold. They came looking for El Dorado, the lost city of gold. They were looking for the fountain of youth as well. The conquistador de Soto explored up and down the Mississippi River. He died in Louisiana, went through Alabama looking for a Black Indian city of gold. These motherfuckers were spending billions of dollars back in the day to take ships all the way from Spain over here because they heard these legends, that they heard and saw evidence of gold in abundance. So again, I say all that to say this. The Spanish and the British had totally different mission and motivation. The Spanish are coming to steal the gold, send it back to Spain so they can have a competitive advantage over their other Europeans they're in competition with. The British, when they come hundreds of years later, they come because they're fleeing oppression in Europe and they want to turn this into their new kingdom. So if we want to really look into who's going to tell the truth about the phenotype of the American Indians, the Spanish ain't got no reason to lie to kick it. This right here is a Spanish depiction of the continent of America. This is a Black Indian woman with a dog, bow and arrow. This is a depiction of the New World. We see Black Indians. East Coast, West Coast, down south, Midwest, Black Indians. The Spaniards called us negros de terras, which translates to blacks of the land, or mestizos, mulats, mulatto. The list goes on and on. This is a painting of Indians playing a game at a California mission. You see light-skinned Indians, you see dark-skinned Black Indians. The Indian standing up on the right with his hands in his pants looked like a typical nigga posted up on a block, right? It says Indians playing a game where they shooting craps, they playing dominoes. I don't know. We see Black folks, though. Let's talk about it. So, again, Spanish, they got a lot of the records. The Spanish were at least open and honest about the phenotype, about the complexion. Furthermore, I'll leave you with this. If anybody ever doubts the claim that there were Black indigenous people, not just in America, but in all of the Americas, South America, Central America included, Caribbean included, if they ever doubt that, ask them, well, have you ever heard of the Blancormento? And I guarantee you they haven't. I guarantee you they've never heard of the Blancormento, but they'll be quick to say, oh no, every Black person comes from Africa and no Black people are indigenous to America and blah, 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 blah. Right, guys? Right? Let me see. Is there anybody in the chat that's never heard of the Blancormento? Let me get a 0 in the chat if there's anybody here that has not heard that phrase before. Blancormento or Brancormento. There's a couple different pronunciations to it. But let me know, guys. Give me some feedback. Give me some feedback. And you know what? I'm already anticipating that there's going to be somebody out there who may have not heard of it. So let me go ahead and just get these documents prepared. Let me just go ahead and get this pulled up. I got a nice little painting to show you and everything, y'all. I got a little painting and everything. Let's see. Is there anybody here that's never heard of the Blancormento? Engine Radio's heard of it. That's what's up. You've been doing your research. Whistleblower says towards Louisiana, they have a lot of Indians, which they are Creole. Yeah. During the one-on-one consultations I give people, I do a whole section about the origin of Louisiana Creoles and, the Code Noir, which was the French doctrine that governed slavery. Oh, and ding, 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 ding. We've got one, not just one, ding, 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 ding. We've got two people that have never heard of the Blancormento. Okay. Well, let me put you up on game. Again, if there's anybody that ever doubts Black indigenous people in the Americas since the beginning of time, then ask them, what was the Blanquamiento about then? Because this is what the Blanquamiento is all about. This was a Spanish conquistador colonial policy. This was a Spanish conquistador colonial policy. Blanquamiento in Spanish or branquamiento in Portuguese, both meaning whitening. This is a social, political, and economic practice used in many post-colonial countries in the Americas and Oceania to, quote, improve the race or mejorar la raza. Damn. And what are they trying to improve the race towards? A more ideal racial whitening, ideal whitening, an ideal of whiteness. This painting depicts it exactly. What you would have is a black indigenous woman. Wait a minute, if there's no black indigenous, then why are the Spaniards depicting the indigenous grandmother as this, as a Negro? Ah, wait a minute. So again, this was the policy. This is what the painting is showing you. You take a black indigenous woman, you force her to have a baby with a European. Now her daughter comes out like this, a mulat, a mestizo, a mulatto. Then they force her daughter to have a baby with another European. And now her baby comes out like this, white passing, indistinguishable from a Spanish conquistador. So again, if there's no such thing as black Indians in the Americas, Central and South America included, then why did the Spanish conquistadors systematically try to breed the black Indians out of existence? And we see remnants of this to this day. Central and South America got issues with what? Colorism, skin bleaching. The dark-skinned people, the Afro-Latinas, they live in the favelas. The light-skinned white passing ones, they live in the cities. Did you know that over 58% of Latinos that come to America identify as white? Why is that? Because of a colonial policy like this. So again, this is your ace in the hole. This is your checkmate. This is your end-all be-all. If anyone doubts black Indians in all of the Americas, then what is this? What is that? I didn't paint this. This is an AI Photoshop. I mean, again, this is on Wikipedia. Wikipedia isn't always the best source, but this is public knowledge. This is not conspiratorial. I mean, if I do another Google search for Blanquamiento, let me just go ahead and type it in here. Let's see if we find some other resources besides Wikipedia. We've got, it's talking about dental and yeah, so in general, Blanquamiento translates to whitening. So they're going to just think we're just talking about like Spanish whitening. So let me type in some more keywords. Blanquamiento, colonial policy. Let's see if we can get some other sources. Cambridge University, Spanish America, whitening the race. Again, guys, I'll fact check myself. Let's bring up some additional sources. We got a whole book, Racial Subordination in Latin America. The role of the state, customary law, and the new civil rights response. Interesting. Spanish America, whitening the race, the unwritten laws of Blanquamiento and Mestizaje. Within a short span of time from when Spanish American countries were pronouncing the complete abolition of slavery, primarily from 1850 to 86, they were also confronted with the simultaneous growth of eugenics, a pseudo-scientific movement that sought to improve the human race by preserving the genetic purity of whites. Thus, an inquiry into the 19th century role of law in regulating race in Latin America must consider the influence of eugenics in the region. Come on, y'all. European nations of eugenics associated the prevalence of non-whites in Spanish America with the backwardness of mongrel nations. Between 1880 and 1930, intellectuals in Spanish America found support for their own racial elitism in European racial theories. Come on. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, if you're new to the broadcast, if you're new to the program, my name is Mike TV, also known as the King of Receipts. I hope you've learned something new here, just as I have. And don't go anywhere, because as soon as this broadcast ends, there's going to be a countdown, and we're going to segue into a live debate. I'm going to have a call-in link. You guys can call in. Let's chop it up. But let's keep the party going, y'all. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
They don't want you to remember this. You not no slave, you indigenous. Fuck how they painted them Indians. You went to war with the French and the British, man. Quite frankly, you was kings, Merovingians. They took the women and men, made them prisoners. Raised up the children to worship their images. Set up a lab to the genes and they mixed them. And this shit get way deeper than your pigment.